Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to the September edition of DBA Fundamentals Down Under and this month's lunchtime session. In this session today, we've got Sean McCown talking to us about understanding backups. Now, I'll hand over to Sean shortly, but before we do, just got a couple of slides to run through. First off, we just want to have a call out to our sponsors, SQL Sentry, who, if you don't already know who SQL Sentry are, they provide some fantastic resources for those of us in the SQL Server community. So feel free to go along to their website, have a look at all of these resources available to you, and you'll find some great little nuggets to help you out. So for those of you who may not know, but we've got Past Summit coming up very soon. Now, we've got a couple of days left. If you buy tickets before midnight on September 18, it'll be $2,195. And if you use this discount code, you can get a further $150 off. After that time frame, it'll go up by another $200. If you are already going, then hopefully you've got your tickets already planned out, and we might see you there. As always, these sessions will be recorded and made available probably within the next week after this session, so that you can come back and review everything that Sean does go through in today's session. So just make sure that you stay tuned for next month's session, where I've got Erin Stellato from SQL Skills talking to us about statistics. So with that done, I'm just going to hand over to Sean. Make him the...
Excuse me, guys, I don't usually show my screen in public like this, but I'm being forced to. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Excellent. So this session is usually fairly interactive, like all of my stuff, so teaching this on the web is going to be a lot more difficult for me, so I've changed my mind. If there are any questions, then go ahead and shout them out so I know that I'm not alone. Okay, so I'm going to fire this up here, start from the beginning, and I usually don't get into slides, but in this case, I've got a couple slides that make me feel good, so I go ahead and show this thing. And I've got one that demonstrates some log restore stuff. So one of the things that, actually, let me go ahead and get into the vanity slide, and then I'll talk about the backup stuff here in a second. So for those of you that don't know who I am, I'm Sean McCown. I am a certified master and an MVP. I started MidnightDBA.com, where we have nothing but 100% free training videos. We started that back in like 2005, 2006, somewhere around there, and we've got tons of videos, and you can download them and watch them and pass them out to your friends and burn them onto CDs. You can do anything except make money off of them. We don't even ask you for an email when you go there. You just go there and just start watching videos. I'm also the principal consultant for Midnight SQL Consulting. I own Minionware Software, where we have the world-famous free Minion backup and reindex tools. I personally think they're the best backup and reindex tools on the planet, but I'm a little bit biased. Okay, now, on to backups. So, I'm not going to waste your time explaining what backup is for, because, I mean, all you guys know what it's for. But what I really want to do is spend a lot of time explaining some of the things that maybe somebody else hasn't ever bothered explaining to you before. A lot of people they do one of two things. They either parrot commands, or they use the GUI, and that's just not how to get things done. The GUI is the worst possible way to run a backup. So I'm gonna show you nothing GUI here whatsoever, because GUIs are slow, they're accident prone, and they're not repeatable. And I've had somebody say before, well, who cares if it's not repeatable? I only have to restore a database every now and then. And while officially you're right about that, there have been plenty of times when I've had to restore dozens of databases on a box that went down, or had to restore a database to a dev box every single day, or had to restore something to a QA box, or had to restore 24 databases to a dev box every single day. And I'm not going to sit there and click through a GUI through that entire thing. So it's just not reasonable to back up and restore in a GUI. And it's so incredibly easy to write a backup statement. I don't understand where the GUI actually saves you time. It flat out doesn't. So I realize that the GUI may be shiny and alluring, but it's all a trick because it really slows you down. Now, I've gotten a little flack for this slide because somebody said, hey, you know, what about the girls in the audience? So if there are any girls watching today, I've got Danny Ocean with a puppy. And last time I showed this, I had somebody else give me some flack to ask me if my wife approved of this one because it's not as sexy as the last one. And she was supposed to find me a new slide, but she hasn't come up with anything yet. So you still get Danny Ocean with the puppy. You know why I still call him Danny Ocean? Because I'll be damned if I can remember his name right now. But I've seen Ocean's 11 like 100 times. So he's Danny Ocean. And so using a GUI is like driving a chocolate Porsche. Sure, it looks kind of cool, but how fast could you possibly go in something like that, right? Now, I realize that I'm hitting the GUI thing like really hard. That's because I see it so much. I see so many people doing things in a GUI, clicking through the wizard when they could have written a statement, you know, 2 minutes ago and been on their way. It's really, you know, writing the statement is really the way to go. And I wanted to show you guys this because this is actually a picture of a group of devs that were trying to restore a lot of databases in the wizard at a last company of mine. And this is what ended up happening to them. And, you know, I know what it looks like, but that's not mud that they're swimming around in. So don't let this happen to your mouse finger. Let's go ahead and do some backups. See? This is why I don't have slides, because I end up mostly being useless. Okay, so backups. It's really simple to have a let me make sure I'm on the right server. There we go. So it's really simple to write a backup statement. You say backup database, and then you give the database name. And then disk equals. So where am I backing it up to? I'm backing it up to the disk. And I give it a full path and a file name. Now, a lot of times, and this isn't required, a lot of times you'll put the date in there. What is the date today? 09. It's the 12th here. Is it the 12th or the 13th over there where you guys are? Probably the 13th, huh?
Yeah, so, it's the 13th.
Okay, well, I'll go by my clock. So a lot of times you'll put the date on the end of it. It's not strictly necessary because the file system will give you the date, but sometimes if the file gets copied to different places, depending on how it gets copied, it could get a new date written. So you can't really rely on the OS date, on the file date that it has in the OS all the time. So I like to put the date in there. No. If you were backing up to a tape, you would say to tape, which I don't even think SQL supports anymore. So why would you do that, right? Now, within it, these two flags right here are extremely important. The reason why is because init stands for initialize, and they're almost the same thing, except they do slightly different things. So init stands for initialize, and what we mean by that is reinitialize the data. So that means overwrite the data in the file. But it keeps the header. So ordinarily that's not such a big deal because you're going to back up to one file, then you're going to back up to another file. But if you ever switch the number of files that you back up to, you're going to need to put format in there because format reformats the header for the media set. So here's kind of what I mean. A long time ago, boy, when I started teaching this, it was just a little while ago. Now it's a long time ago. So a long time ago, we had this, I was the lead DBA for a data warehouse. we reloaded most of the data every night, so backups weren't super important. But we still took backups because I'm a DBA and that's what you do. Oh, by the way, can everybody see this? Do you want me to embiggen the font? Here, there you go. I'll make it like that. So our backup was failing, and you know, I came in one morning and the backup had failed, and I was like, oh well, I'll look into it soon, right? Got busy that day, failed again tomorrow. I was like, hey, I'll look at it soon. 3 or 4 days go by because, like I said, the backups weren't super important, but I finally got tired of seeing the email and I started looking into it. And when I looked into it, what I found was we weren't using the format command, and the header had gotten corrupted, but it was trying to overwrite the data every day. But since the header was corrupted, then it couldn't overwrite the data every day because the header was corrupt. It couldn't read the header. So as soon as I went in there and took a manual backup, I could have added it to the job that I was testing, right? As soon as I went in there and overwrote the header with format, then it started working again. So init overwrites the data, and format overwrites the header. Now, I can show you this pretty easily. Let's go ahead and run this. This ought to work. There we go. It's a small database. Now, if I do this guy, let's go ahead and say, right, so let's say if I try to do that. So now I'm going to stripe it to this file and to this file, but I'm going to leave off the format, and it fails because it said the media loaded on SPBAC is formatted to support one media family, and I'm passing it 2 media families, right? So therefore, here I'll do that again without the format. It fails because when I took this backup, it formatted it for 1 file. But now I'm trying to take the backup with 2 files, and it's borking. But if I format this, which rewrites the header, it will rewrite the header for 2 media families, right? Now it kicks off just fine, because now I reformatted the header and told it, you know, use this new information. Now if I were to come back here and do this one without format, I almost messed up my demo, it's going to fail again because now it's formatted to support 2 media families, but only 1 media family was passed in. So you can see that you really have to have, and let me take this last one just to show you one more time. There we go. So you can see that that init and that format do 2 completely different things. This one overwrites the data. This one overwrites the header. All right. Let's see, where am I? Okay, good. Okay, so backup devices. This is going to be less of a tutorial on backup devices than it is a cautionary tale, right? So I'm not a fan of backup devices. And I'm going to show you what backup devices are, and I'm going to show you how they're used, but you really don't want to use them because I personally think they're practically worthless. In fact, I don't really need this. I can get rid of all. There we go. So a backup device is one of those things that's supposed to make things a lot easier. It's supposed to keep you from having to type all of this, right? It's supposed to keep you from typing the full path and the file name so that now you can just give it a friendly name, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So if I were to say backup database speak to SP, SP is a dump device. And what's behind the scenes of that dump device is something like this. It maps to a full path and a file name. So you can see how that really makes it easier when you're typing that. but only when you're typing it. It stops there. So if I wanted to add a new device, I would say add SP dump device. What type of device? It's a disk. What do I want to call it? I want to call it SP2. And you can see here that I want to map it to this specific file. So I'll go ahead and run that. There we go. If I want to see all of my backup devices, I can query sys backup devices. There we go. And I've got that one right there that I just mapped. But the problem here comes in the rest of the management. Let's say that you get a restore command from somebody that you're supposed to run, and it just says this. How do you know where this is? What if this dump device isn't on the system anymore? What if somebody accidentally deleted it? Or what if it just never got put on the system? Or what if it's a dev box? And this is really common, right? The problem with the problem is that most people look at backup and restore as a single event. I backed up the database, I created a file, and my event is done. No, you've got all kinds of operations that need to be done to these things, including moving them around, copying them to different places, restoring them, using them to initialize different HADR scenarios, right? All types of things that you need to do with these backups possibly once they're done. So having this dump device here that just says SP, when I go to restore that to a dev box, I don't have that SP, I don't have that dump device on there. I would have to create that dump device, which means I've got to type this anyway. So it's not like if you take a backup to a backup device that you can never, ever, ever restore it using the full path. Sure you can. I could easily copy the backup to a dev box and then restore it using with disk equals and then type that in. But what would be the point of using backup devices if you're just going to turn around and use the full path of the file name in the restore command anyway? And you still have to manage these backup devices too. So as long as you have these backup devices, or as long as you have the backup files on disk, you've got to keep all of its backup devices there as well. And you've got to make sure to manage these out too. So when you delete a backup file, then you need to make sure that you go through and delete its dump device as well. And that's just too many moving, that's too many moving parts, right? If you're going to manage it based off of space or based off of time, then just go ahead and type the command every single time. Managing the dump device is just it's just too much. It's a holdover from like SQL 6.0 or 6.5, and it hasn't really been useful since then. So every now and then I still run into people that are that love dump devices, and I say whatever. But to me, I say ignore them. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this guy. I'm going to drop device, and I'm going to delete the file. There shouldn't even be a file there. Okay, so that's enough on that. So let's talk about file names and extensions. And while we're talking about file names and extensions, let's review the syntax really quick, because I like to drill these things into you, right? So let's say backup database, database name. It's really simple. To, where am I backing it up to? I'm backing it up to a disk, and that disk equals the full path to the file name. And of course, with init and format. Always with init and format. I didn't put init and format here because I'm not going to run these. Now, standards in SQL have developed such that .back is a full it's really a full or a diff backup file. I prefer .diff for my diffs, and then .trn for log backups. But that's not necessary. Just like with database files, where we've developed the MDF and the NDF and the LDF, those are just standards. SQL doesn't require that. You can create a database with an XLS or with a .doc or with a .pdf. As a matter of fact, When I teach DBAs in companies, quite often what I will do is I'll create a database with files named like .xlsx and .docx and .pdf and maybe even .txt, and then I'll make them go onto the server and try to delete those files, and I'll usually give like a book or something to somebody who can get those files deleted first, because it never crosses their mind that they could be SQL files, because I've given them common extensions. So backups are the same way. SQL doesn't care what file extension you give it. So I can even call it speak full my best backup ever. I don't have to give it a file extension at all. Or I could use the extension to help me protect from unwanted removal. I could say .archive do not delete. I've actually used this a few times in companies, and it has saved me from having my backups deleted by an overzealous Windows admin a couple times. Not often, but when they see that extension in Windows, archive do not delete, in fact, let's go ahead and run this one. And let's see, that was my backups, was it? See, my backups. And then here's what that looks like in Windows. Archive do not delete file. So that's pretty telling. I mean, he would have to be pretty stupid to delete that anyway and say, I had no idea I wasn't supposed to delete it, right? I've also used this to help junior DBAs. Actually, didn't I say I wasn't going to run any of these? Well, as it turns out, I am. And here, do not restore to dev systems. I think that's a pretty clear message. And you can use this to write yourself a little note, right? I took this backup because I know the developer is an idiot and will screw up his upgrade. It tells me exactly why that backup is here. And I've even got it right there in the file system to prove it. So you can use extensions to your advantage. You don't have to just stick with the .back and .diff and .trn. Warwick, which one do you prefer? Do you prefer the diff or the back for your diff files?
For the diff files, using diff, it makes it easier for people to quickly identify.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I usually put it in the file name and in the extension as well. So I'll give like a backup. I'll give like the database name, the backup type, and then I'll give an extension on top of that. So I like to give myself a couple chances to not screw up.
It also makes it easy with your cleanup jobs.
Yes, exactly. That way you don't have to parse the file name in order to get that. Now, you can also use the default backup location. I don't know anybody that actually does this. I get why SQL has this, but in a lot of systems that I've seen, we end up doing more with we end up striping them to more different locations than that. So using the default backup location has never really done anything for me, but it's nifty. I like the way it's done, right? So the default backup location, and I'll show you where to change it here in a second, but that just keeps you from having to type a path. You can just say to disk equals and then just give it the file name that you want, and it'll automatically put it in that folder. So if I come here and go to Object Explorer, I think I just go here, and if I go to Facets, there's also a PowerShell way to do this, but we'll skip that for now. The backup directory right there, and you can change that to anything you want. And then, so if you've got a single location on your box that all of your databases are going to be backed up to, then you could put the default backup directory in here and then just specify this. But I never really trust where that is at any given moment, that somebody hasn't come in and changed it out from under me. So I still prefer to hard code my path. It just makes me personally feel better.
So Sean,
Okay, so
sorry, just a
yes,
quick question because it follows on with what we've just been talking about. Extensions.
yeah,
The question is there an extension that we cannot use?
an extension? I don't think so. I haven't tried all of the extensions possible, but I wouldn't imagine that SQL would care. It just creates the file, and it gives it an extension that that you tell it, right? So even if I were to come here and say, let's call it .pdf. I mean, SQL shouldn't care. There might be one exception. There we go. We got a PDF, and it even shows the PDF, right? Because Windows doesn't know the difference. But let me try this one. This is one I've never tried before, but I don't think it's going to matter. Let me try a null. But I don't think that's going to matter. Nope. So that's the only one I could think of that may have borked on something, and even it didn't. So no, I don't think so. There's a length. Go ahead.
Yeah, the only one I could think of, and it probably wouldn't stop you, but it's more just from a name that you wouldn't want to, and that's putting it as a .mdf or a .ndf.
Yeah.
Because you just confuse yourself.
Yeah, but these are dirty little tricks that you can play on people that, yeah, even then. So you're right though, it's gonna show it as a master data file, but it certainly isn't. So if somebody goes to try to attach that file, in fact, I'm going to get rid of that because I'm the kind of guy who will. But yeah, so it still won't puke. But there is a length to, there is a limit on the length that an extension can be. But I don't know what it is, because you could see this one down here in line 117 got pretty long, and it took the entire thing. So I don't really know what the limit is anymore.
And then following on with your location. What about UNC paths?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely nothing. So let me see where I was here. In fact, I'll use the no path right here. So that's really easy. There we are. And I think that's a live. I think that's live. We'll find out. And while we're waiting...
And the only other one came back from the extension, maybe some special characters like an @ or a bang symbol.
Huh. So this one threw up because I didn't have the folder created. But yeah, that's what a UNC would look like. Right there, you just pass the UNC path, that's fine. And a bang, huh? So you want to do it just like this?
Why not?
That's interesting. Ha! I like it. I like it. Yeah, see, I never thought of that. That's really cool. So let's see. Let's do @bang $, just to get really ridiculous with it. But anything that's legal in Windows should be legal here. There you go. Yeah, SQL just doesn't care. Perfect. Yeah, I never thought of the bang, bang, bang before. I like that.
So it's not a question, it's more of a comment. So important to note that UNC paths cannot be specified through the wizard. Another good reason for command line backups.
Right. Right. See, I didn't know that because I haven't used the wizard in almost 20 years now. So I haven't even fired it up. I have no idea what it even looks like. So I'll take your word for it. Okay. If there's nothing else, we're going to move on to the restore side, I believe.
Okay.
Because believe it or not, and while you're figuring out if there's anything else, because believe it or not, there's not much more to basic backup than that. There's really not, guys. This is why I don't understand why the wizard is such a big deal. Because who can't type this faster than you can right-click, go to the wizard, and then open up a thing, and then choose a file, and then choose a couple options, and oh, good God, man, you could have typed that thing 4 times over in that time, and then saved it so you don't have to type it the next time. You know, if you've got SQL prompt, you don't even have to do that. You could type yourself out a shell, right? That just says backup tab, and then it fills in all that stuff, and all you got to do is give the file name. I mean, you could get really lazy with it. So, yeah, I just don't understand why the wizard is such a big deal. And you can even watch it, right? If you want stats equals 5, so that's gonna show you stats at every 5%, and we'll say here stats equals 10, right? In fact, let me do a big database right here that I know is going to be a little bit bigger, and I'll call it that. And let's do stats equals 5, and that should run. And over here in messages, you get the 5% processed, and it's just going to keep going through there like that. So, you know, the command line is so incredibly easy. Even if you don't really type all that well, it's still a lot faster than going through the GUI, and the GUI is isn't repeatable. So, okay, while that's going, let's go ahead and jump into restores, because we're going to spend some time here. This is one of those things that I don't think enough people put enough emphasis on, so I like to spend plenty of time here when I teach this kind of thing, because the restores are all about the logs. And if you don't understand the basics of how the logs work, then you guys don't mind if I don't make this full screen, do you? I mean, I'm kind of in a thing here, so you can see it anyway. So if you don't understand how the logs work, then you're not going to understand why you need to restore the logs the way you do. So what I'm talking about here is going to be concept versus fact, right? So I'm trying to get some concepts across to you. Some of the metaphors that I may use when I'm teaching this aren't necessarily going to be the internal implementation of how it actually works. So if there are any other MCMs out there in the audience, I don't want anybody raising a hand saying, that's not how that works, that really does this instead. I'm getting a concept across, dude. This is a beginning course, not a master's course, right? So with that in mind, let's consider the transaction log, and I think I will do that from the current slide. So I don't think you can see those numbers very well. I need to fix that one day. But there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 5 right there. And these yellow blocks represent different log backups. So the log was backed up here, then it was backed up here, then here, and then here. Now, transaction number 5 started and finished in the time frame of this log backup. But that's the only one. Number 1 goes all the way to number 3. Number 2 goes to number 3 as well, but it started before this one. Number 3 goes through number 2, and number 4 stretches across all 4 of them. So one thing that has to be there, and I'm gonna show you this kind of in a roundabout sort of way, is that each one has to have a beginning and an end in order to be recovered. You can't recover a partial transaction. So it's kind of like videotapes, and this is the interactive portion, so I'll just have you play along like you were the audience, and I'll just talk to you, Warwick. So so I've got Welcome Back, Cotter on tape here, and I've got tapes 1, 2, and 3. How many tapes are missing?
We don't know.
I'll take that as an I don't know. Yeah, right? You don't know how many tapes are missing. I've got the entire series on VHS, and I have no idea how many tapes are missing. Because you don't know how many seasons there were, you don't know how many episodes each tape holds, you don't know if I recorded the commercials as well. There's all kinds of things about it that you don't know. So there's no way for you to know if there are 4 tapes in the series or 40 tapes in the series. So and I taught this to some people a couple months ago at a SQL Saturday, and most of them were young, and I had to explain to them how videotape worked in order for this, because none of them had ever actually touched a VHS. So you've touched a VHS, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So if I'm at the beginning of the tape and I want to watch an episode that starts in the middle of the tape, I can just go to the menu, to the tape menu, and start watching and choose that one and just start watching that, right?
No.
No. You got to play through the entire thing. You can fast forward through it, but tapes are linear. They're, it's like a cassette, right? It's linear, and you've got to spool through that entire tape and get to the right spot. Sometimes you do an ultra fast forward and then you stop and you play. Nope, that's not good enough. You fast forward again, you stop and you play, and you keep doing that until you snipe the location you're interested in, and then you can play from there, right? Well, the log is the exact same way. If you look at the SQL log like a videotape, then you can't go wrong. And this analogy is absolutely perfect. I have no idea what comes next. Okay, so it's that. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that yet or not. So, the thing about restoring logs is, and I'm going to drive this home probably a little too much, but I don't think I can, is when you're restoring logs, let's go back one. When I restore this log, these transactions that haven't completed yet, SQL has no idea when they're going to finish. It has no way of knowing because it doesn't know how many rows you're pushing through. It doesn't say at the beginning of the transaction, I'm going to be altering 4,000 rows or 40 million rows, right? It probably doesn't know that until it finishes it itself, right? What if that is a bulk load, right? It has no idea how many rows are going to be in that file that you're importing. It just knows that it's going to import until it's done. So when you finish this log backup right here, SQL has no way of knowing if the transaction is going to finish here, 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 or in another 40 more log backups. It has no idea of knowing when that's going to finish. Just like you have no way of knowing how many tapes are missing because you don't know how many there were to begin with. So SQL has no idea how many rows there are in this transaction, so it has no idea. It has no way to know whether, when it's going to finish. The only one that it knows about is this one because it starts and stops within the same log backup period, right? Within the same log backup, it stopped and started. But the rest of these, it has no idea. So, it sounds a little bit cliche, but this is what ACID is all about. And it really boils down to making sure that you've got a single piece of info that stays intact. So, what is a single bit of info? Well, actually, your business defines that. It's not something that I can specifically tell you that this is a single piece of info. We have implicit transactions, and SQL takes guesses. Well, this was a statement that you ran, and you didn't say that it was part of a transaction, so I'm going to make it part of its own transaction and say, implicitly, and say that, it's a single piece of info. But we've got explicit transactions as well, right? So let's say that we have a rule in our database that says every new customer has to have 3 contacts and they have to have at least 1 order. Well, that actually makes a lot of business sense because A, you have to know how to contact your customers, and if they don't have at least 1 order, then they're not really a customer, are they? They're a potential customer, but they're not really a customer. So let's say that you have a transaction that comes in. Somebody comes in through the front end of the web, and they enter in all their info, and they place their order, and the database writes the 3 contacts to the table, and then something happens and the machine dies before it gets their order written to the table. You don't have a full transaction because we have said in our business rules that the transaction means it has 3 contacts and an order. So we've got an incomplete transaction here. So SQL guarantees that it's going to recover your database in a transactionally consistent state, which means it's not going to leave you in a position of having a new customer who doesn't have an order. It's going to make sure that everything is there or nothing is there. So what's going to happen in the case of the machine dying in the middle of this guy's order? Well, it really depends on how you restore and how much you're able to restore. And we're going to talk about that in a minute too. So I think, yes, so now we are on to the restore demos. Woohoo! We might come back to here, and we might come back to here. So I'll load this one up. And now let's go ahead and get into restoring. See, and we finished here. We went all the way to 100%, and we went 138 megs a second for 65 seconds. And if you want to see how to make that go really, really fast, then you can go to Midnight DBA and see my backup tuning video. Now, to restore a database, it's really simple. Let's see. In fact, it looks like I'm setting up something here, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. Wow, that was fast. Okay, now, to restore a database, it's really not much harder than backing up a database. I say restore database CDC. I'm not restoring it to a disk. I'm restoring it from a disk. And that disk is going to be the name of the backup file, the full path to the backup file. All of this stuff right here is just me getting exclusive access to the database. So I'm going to set it to single user with rollback immediate, then I'm going to drop it, then I'm going to restore it. I could restore it over itself, but I'm dropping it in this case. And actually, getting exclusive access to a database you're trying to restore can be one of the hardest things you ever do, because there are services out there that sit there and pull those things so fast. Sometimes it can be really hard to get exclusive access to a database. So right here, I'm going to do this little thing right there. And there. Restored database successfully processed 826 pages at 8 megs a second. There we go. So I've done a full restore. And that's really all there is to a basic restore. But that's not really all there is to it, right? Because otherwise we would be able to teach a class on it. So right now I'm going to set it back into single user again. I'm going to restore header only so that you can see the kind of stuff that's in there. Now, this header only, this is where you get to see all of your LSN info, your last LSN, your first LSN. This is where those log chains are going to come in, that I'm going to show you in a little while, and you get to see the backup start date and the finish date. You get to see all kinds of information about your backup file, including the originating server, which has been handy on more than a number of occasions to see where a backup has originated. So there's a lot of columns there that we're not going to go through right now. But remember a second ago when I said that I was going to drop the database instead of restoring over the top of it. If I want to restore over the top of it, then I use replace with replace. Now, this is this is easy, but beginners have a hard time understanding this. So if I were at the file system, let me get rid of that. There we go. So if I were in here and I wanted to copy this file to the same directory, it would change the name. So if I did a Control-C and then did a Control-V, it's going to copy it, but it's going to give it to me as a copy. See, right there. I'm going to stop that. There we go. So it's going to give it to me as a copy. Let me pick one of the smaller ones instead. There we go, this guy. Nope, this guy right here. So if I Control-C, Control-V, it gives it to me, but it gives it to me as a copy. Because you can't have the same file. I mean, you can't have two files with the exact same name in the same location. It has to be unique. It absolutely has to be unique. And when you're creating a database, whether you're creating it from scratch or creating it from a backup, you're mapping it to you're mapping it to physical files, right? You're literally saying, I want you to create these files on the hard drive. So if you're creating it to the same location with the same file names, then it's going to bork and say, hey, you can't do this. As a matter of fact, let's get rid of these moves here. There we go. So I'm going to just do this guy right here. I'm going to restore from that exact same location that I just did. And when I do that, oh, let me see where I am here. I shouldn't still be. There we go. Where am I? Oh, I'm in single user. Come on, get off. I'm waiting. Oh, do me a favor and crash, will you? I'd like that. Ah, there we go. Okay. So, let me get rid of the single user real quick because I didn't mean to do that. In fact, I'll just do this again. Right there. There we go. Now, when I come to restore this database, I don't want CDC2. I want CDC. Sorry, guys. Give me just a sec. There we go. Now, if I want to restore the database under a different name, I just give it a different name, but it's still mapped to the same files. So if I come here and try to restore the database under a different name, CDC2, which it looks like I need to get rid of, and I keep the same files, it's gonna bark at me because the files can't be overwritten. It says here that CDC MDF cannot be overwritten because I've done nothing but say I want to map this database to these files, but the CDC database is already mapped to these files. So what I have to do is I either have to move it and point it to new files, or I have to do a replace and say I want to write over this, and I want to replace this. I want to replace these files with these files. So I prefer the move myself. So I'm going to move the CDC, the logical file name. I'm going to move that to this file, and I'm going to move the log file to this physical file. And of course, you get those by doing a restore file list only, and you're going to move these logical file names. Let me see if I can map those for you. There you go. CDC, CDC, CDC log, and I'm going to move those to their new locations on these new files. And that is how you move, that's how you have two different databases, or the same database with two names, and or that you can move a database to a different location if you want to. So we do that all the time with dev boxes, right? When the dev server doesn't have the same drive letters that the prod does, and you have to move those to different locations. Any questions on that? Did I muddle that up enough with my little restore foo there? All right. If anybody comes up with any questions, then just holler at me.
So just one question. So what happens to uncommitted transactions when we give the with recovery command at the end of a log restore?
Right. So we're going to talk about log backups or log restores next.
Stay tuned.
Yep, stay tuned. So here I'm going to back up the CDC database, and I'm calling this a log restore base so that I can tell it apart from the rest. And I'm going to do a series of updates and backups. So I'm going to do my first update and my first backup. I'll do my second update and my second backup and my third update and my third backup. There we go. Okay, now, to perform the restore, I am going to clear all the transactions just in case anything weird is in there. And now, I'm going to restore database from disk equals, and I'm going to use that log restore base. This is my full backup, right? I'm restoring the database. And in this case, I'm going to restore it with replace, and I'm going to use no recovery. So here's the cool part. No recovery means, let's go back to that yellow screen. Where is it? Here it is. So at the end of every restore, SQL is going to do what's called recovery. And recovery has two phases. It has undo and it has redo. So redo says, in this case right here of the 5 will be redone. It has a beginning and an end. So since the entire transaction is in this backup, it's going to say, it's going to go ahead and push that to the data file. It's going to say, okay, replay this transaction. I've got the whole thing, and just push the whole thing forward and put it in the data file. However, if there are any transactions that aren't complete, like the rest of these, it's going to roll them back. And it's going to say, I don't have the full transaction, and since I need to have the full transaction because of that ACID stuff we talked about, right, then I've got to roll the entire thing back. It has no idea if it's going to finish here or all the way over here. It just knows that it doesn't have a full transaction. So without a full transaction, SQL has no choice but to roll back. It has no choice but to roll back uncommitted transactions. However, when you say no recovery, what you're telling SQL is you're telling SQL, now wait a minute, I realize that you want to undo these transactions because they're not finished yet, but I'm not finished restoring. The transaction's going to finish later. So don't roll anything back, don't undo anything, just hold off, and the rest of the transactions are coming. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to restore the database, and we're going to say, don't recover it, just wait, I'm not finished yet. Because remember, going back to here, SQL has no idea how many videotapes or how many transactions are missing. And transaction logs are chronological. You have to go in order. There's no menu that allows you to jump around from one place in the log to another. It has to be played in its entirety. Now, when you restore, hopefully it restores faster, right? So you can fast forward through it, but you still have to go through the entire thing, no matter how fast. So when we restore this guy here, using no recovery, I come here and I get put in the restoring state. Oops. Now, I'm saying, okay, now I'm going to restore this next, I'm going to restore my first log. And instead of restore database, I say restore log, but the rest of it is the same, including no recovery. And you can use your stats options here too, right? Comma stats equals 5, comma stats equals 10, right? So I'm going to say no recovery again because I've still got 2 other log backups. So I'm saying here, I want to restore the database, but don't recover anything yet because I'm not finished. And here you're saying I'm going to restore a log, but don't recover yet because I'm not finished. Same thing, and you notice the state doesn't change. It's still restoring. Stop that. So now I'm going to go through the last 2. And I'm going to run them at the same time because it's the exact same thing. There we are. And I get the same thing. I'm still in the restoring state. It's not working on me. It's frozen up again. Give me a sec. There we go. Do me a favor and you know, bounce or something. There we go. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Now, if I want to recover the database, then all I have to do is recover it, right? I could just say, I can't remember, right in this second, I can't remember if it's log or database, but we'll find out. There we go. And then I just recovered my database, and I can't restore any more logs after that. So at the end of that, right here, if I still had unrecovered transactions, it would, or if I still had unfinished transactions, it would roll them back. Now, since you can't, since you have unfinished transactions in the database, SQL isn't going to let you in, because remember, the restore process promises that you're going to have a transactionally consistent version of your database. So therefore, it's not going to let you in. You can't even query it while you're restoring with no recovery. But you can put it in standby. And a lot of people, including some pretty experienced DBAs, don't know what standby actually means. So what we really mean by standby, and we realize that that standby lets you query the database by putting it in standby only mode. But how does it actually do that? So what it actually does is it creates a transaction file. And so that's why you have to give it standby equals, and you have to give it a transaction. You have to give it a file. And you can open the file in Notepad, but it's not readable. It's all gibberish to us, so you wouldn't get anything out of it. But here's what happens. If you can't open a database, if you can't access a database while it's in recovery because it's transactionally inconsistent, what SQL does is, during the undo phase, where it's going to roll back those transactions, it rolls those transactions back and puts them in this file. So instead of rolling them back or undoing them and then opening the database, it undoes them, puts them in that file, and then opens the database in read-only mode so that you can access the data in there and look around. Then when you restore the next log, it reads those transactions out of that file and then runs through recovery again. It says, oh, okay, did any of these transactions complete? This one did, this one did, this one did, but this one didn't. And if you're in standby mode, then it'll go ahead and copy that back down to the file, and then all of the other unfinished transactions in there, and open up the database into read-only mode for reading again. So you're still getting a transactionally consistent view of the database. It's just you're able to save those unfinished transactions in this file and then get them back when you go do the next one. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that you can switch back and forth. Let me comment this guy out. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, so let's start this entire process over again. I'm going to go all the way to here. That should work. There we go. There we go. So I just restored all of those guys. Now, if I want to do this, I think I can do this. There we go. Now, I'm in standby read-only. And I can sit there and I can restore one log in no recovery and another log in standby and the next 4 in no recovery and then the next 5 in standby, and you can switch back and forth like that. So it's not always just a one or another proposition, and you can see that I very easily switch this into standby, and now I can easily recover when I'm done. And now I'm finished, and the database is open for business right there. So that's how standby works, and I think I've already got all this up online on our events page. But if not, and if somebody wants this code, then I'm easy to find. You can write me and I'll give you this code. But I give a full explanation of how that works right here. But does anybody have any questions about how standby works? Because I find a lot of people don't really get how that whole thing works, and it's not really lying to put it in standby and saying that you can't access the database with it being in recovery mode, because it actually is recovering the database. It's just not throwing those transactions away. It's putting them in a file instead. Cool. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about, do I have time, by the way?
We've got a couple of minutes, yes, Sean.
Okay. Well, I want to run through diffs real quick. So a diff is really, really simple. To back up a database with a diff, all you have to do is say backup database to disk equals with differential. And what that does is that backs up any, my mind just went blank. It backs up any extents that have changed since the last full backup. And they're cumulative too. So if I take this backup here and then run an update and then run a diff and then another update and then a diff and then another update and a diff, and you notice how these diffs are diff 1, diff 2, and diff 3, the only thing I need to do when I do the restore is I need to restore my full, because you always have to have a restore base to go from, right? And I have to restore diff 3. I don't have to restore diffs 1 and 2. And you notice how I still have to use recovery for both of them. And then at the end, I can restore with recovery, or after that diff, I can even restore more logs on top of that. But that's the thing that you need to, and there's a lot of nuance in here, right? There are some details that I'm not going over because this is a basic session. I'm not trying to teach a master's course on, the internals of diff backups. But the thing that you need to know about this is, again, with a log, you have to restore every single log in order. There is no skipping whatsoever. Every log has to be done in order. If I restore this log and then try to jump down to this log, it's going to fail. Actually, that's the base. If I go to restore this log and then I want to restore this log and skip number 2, it won't let me. You can't skip through it. It's like a videotape. You have to play through the entire thing. There's no skipping whatsoever. No matter how fast you play through it, you have to play through it. A diff isn't like that. I restore, where am I? I restore the full, and then I restore the last diff, and then I recover. But I always have to do that no recovery, because if I don't do no recovery, then it will undo those lingering transactions, and any transactions that are in this guy right here won't be able to complete because the first part of the transaction is missing. So you have kind of the same problem in reverse, right? So you have to have the full transaction regardless, and I think I hit my time. I am done. Thunderous applause at noon, and where are you guys? You're not in Sydney, are you?
No, I'm in Brisbane.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions just to round off.
Sure.
So, is it a good idea to back up a live production database? Will it affect performance?
The answer is it certainly can. By default, SQL uses very few resources to back up a database because it doesn't want to affect any of the operations. But if you go to my backup tuning session, and it's online, it's on midnightdba.com on our events page, and it's called backup tuning or the backup tune-up, something like that, and see what I say on backup tuning, I have a full discussion on that topic there. But the answer is, by default, if you don't use any tuning parameters, you should be okay. But yeah, you have to back up a production database, right? I mean, how else are you going to have a backup of your prod?
Well, if you don't, have a good resume.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so is there a shortcut way to make a copy of an online database? So, for example, I've got database A, and I want to make a copy of it called A test. In the past, I make a backup and I do a restore as A test. Is there a way to skip doing the backup part?
Not a shortcut way, no. That is the shortcut way. There are many ways to copy a database over, and backup and restore is still the preferred method, because not only can you do a partial restore and only get, if you're set up for it, right, and only get some of the file groups that you want. Maybe you want a much smaller version of the database, but you can tune it like I answered in the last question. So if you've got the resources on the system, you could restore even a 2 terabyte database in like under half an hour if you've got the resources for it. So I think that backing up a database, even if I were going to put it on the same system, then that's exactly what that whole with move thing was about that I did up here, right? So you restore a database under a new name, and you move those files to new locations, even if it's the same location, just different file names. And yeah, there's no better way to do that. And when I do this in production, which I've been doing this for 20 years, I can't remember ever doing it any different way. It's absolutely fabulous.
Okay. Is it best practice to rename the logical names?
No, not really. As a matter of fact, I have seen a couple issues with that where it wasn't done properly, or where SQL messed it up and it made the entire database practically inoperable. So, I assume you're talking about if you restore a database under a different name and you want the logical file names to be different. It doesn't matter what the logical file names are unless you're OCD and it just bothers you. But no, it's not really best practice to rename them, no.
Okay. Is there a way to exclude a specific table from the backup? I don't want to restore that table in a non-production environment.
Not the only way, not if you don't plan ahead. So the only way to do that would be to put that table in its own file group, and then take file group backups, and then not restore that, and then do a partial restore where you don't restore that file group. But if it's just default and you've got that table thrown in with everybody else, no, there's no way. The only thing you could do would be to restore the entire database and then drop that table afterwards.
Okay. So when we take a full backup, it contains all transactions until the backup completes, correct?
Sure.
Okay. What about
even transactions that went on during the backup, because it goes through and it reads the log and it backs up the log at the end. So.
Okay. What about a DB snapshot? Can a DB snapshot be used? I'm not sure. Not sure what. So can a DB? Might need some clarification on that one.
Right. So it depends on how the snapshot was taken, right? DBAs aren't fond of snapshots at all, because you've got those applications like Backup Exec and whatnot, right? And Veeam, right? Those tools that take file snapshots. And usually what happens in those restores, and I've seen those things fail more than I've seen them succeed well, is that the log file and the data file aren't in sync when that snapshot gets taken, because it takes that snapshot at the byte level, right? And so when you go to put that back on disk and you go to reattach that database, you usually end up losing that log file because it says that it's incongruous with the data file. And so what you usually end up doing is attaching the data file and recreating the log file, so you lose all of the transactions that were in that log file. So DBAs don't like those snapshots at all. But assuming you don't care about that and it's just going to go on a dev box, and it's the type of snapshot where you could just drop that file out on a disk somewhere and attach it under any name you want, sure, I suppose that would work.
Okay, so while just got a clarification on that. So it was around, so if you've got a large database and the backup takes a while to undertake, then we can use a snapshot of the to get a copy of the database, because it occurs much, much faster.
It does, and it really depends on what you're willing to lose and what the copy is for, right? If you're doing it for if you're doing it as the actual backup of your database that you're going to recover from, I would say tune your backups. Watch my session on backup tuning and learn how to tune your backups, because still nothing beats a good solid SQL backup, because with those snapshots you don't get a point-in-time recovery, and you don't get the same level of granularity and restore that you would get with the SQL backup. You just get those files, and if you need to actually recover your database to keep your business up, I would never personally rely on a snapshot, because it's the potential for data loss is just too high. I don't like it. But like I said, if you're going to just drop it onto a QA box or onto a dev box so somebody can do some testing, and you don't really care about, any number of transactions that might get trampled on when you have to recreate that log file, then sure, I think it'd work in a case like that.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sean, for coming along today and presenting on database backups for DBA Fundamentals Down Under session. Make sure that you stay tuned and join us again, same time next month, where we'll have Aaron Stellato talking to us about statistics. So once again, everybody, thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Take care, guys.
Bye.